Hey everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with me today this is the first one. This is the first live stream podcast. I'm going to be doing a lot of these. This is all part of something called The Experiment, that I'm changing the way I do content to try and reflect the times a little bit. If you're looking back on this, we're right in the middle of the viral pandemic going on right now. Everyone's at home getting used to this. And so I thought I'd change things up a little bit. This is a lot of fun for me. I'm really excited about this. Kind of nervous that I'm going to get everything. I've got a lot of things working right here. I'm going to check the chat real quick. When I start the podcast, which will be in about a minute, I'm not going to be looking at the chat. But after we get past the main topic, I'm going to go into the second part and we'll check the chat out a little bit too. So thank you all for hanging in there with me. I see Evan is here and Josh is here. People are starting to come in. Hey, you guys, good to see you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the show. And I need to press record here. And I need to make sure I'm recording on my computer. And I am. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Today in episode of 119 of the Play Guitar podcast, I explore the rhythm and chord work of Jimi Hendrix. I go over his soul guitar double stops, advanced chord movement, and use of the 7-sharp 9 chord. Oh, by the way, it's the first live episode, so stay tuned. Welcome to episode 119 of the Play Guitar podcast. I am Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out, you've been playing for years, this is the show that will help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. Hello, my guitar playing friends. I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome. The first live episode on YouTube. So if you're listening on audio, I don't normally do things this way. I usually will record the podcast, go back, do some editing, make sure everything comes out okay, and it's just live today. So if you like to catch the live podcast as it goes out, and you can head on over to youtube.com/playguitaracademy, and you hit subscribe and hit the little bell icon. You can be notified, and we'll be going live on Mondays at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time as it is right now. And this is, like I said before, this all comes as a result of the experiment, this redesign that I'm going to do. But we're here to talk about Jimi Hendrix. And this came up in our live streams over the week. We have a bunch of hangouts Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I asked, hey, what do you think would be a good podcast episode for this week? And Jimi Hendrix came up. And so we want to really start with the chords. We're going to do a few of these, get into his playing a little bit, get into the different things that made him so good and his playing so memorable too. But today we're focusing on chords and his rhythm. He was an innovator. Some people love Jimi Hendrix. Some people can't stand Jimi Hendrix. He was very polarizing. I remember one of my jazz teachers when I was going to get music school. He was a old jazz guy, very set in his ways. And I remember him saying, we were talking about different guitar players, and he said everything was going fine until Hendrix came along. I remember him saying that. And he said he changed everything. Everything was fine until he got there. Then it just all the distortion and all that stuff went out the window. So he affected even people who weren't part of his audience as well. It was kind of a turning point for guitar. There's been several of those turning points. So Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Kurt Cobain. Those are times where you can remember that everything changed. So this is going to be a lot of fun diving into it. I've been playing Hendrix, I started trying to learn Hendrix pretty much right away when I started playing guitar. I tried to learn some of his stuff. Didn't do a great job at it, but I tried it. So let's get into this. His approach to lead guitar tone and also just lead guitar and soloing, they're unmistakable. But what was so great about him is that he put it all out there. He was the whole package. I've been watching him a lot over the past couple of days, getting on YouTube, and and I'm watching a lot of live things. And his singing, his rhythm, and lead guitar was all going at once. You think you have, at least I do. I have images of Jimi Hendrix, burning his guitar and jumping around and going, have his forearm over the front of the guitar and all those tricks that he did. But when you watch the songs or watch him live, he was doing so much, he really couldn't move very much. He was really stuck in place, still making everything look effortless. He was doing it all at once. He was not just rhythm, lead, singing. He was the focal point. He was the performer, taking that all in. So that's a heavy responsibility. Today we're going to start with the chord. We're going to pick each one of those apart over the next, I don't know, maybe this weekend or maybe even next week's podcast. I'm not sure, but we're going to pick each aspect of his playing apart. So we talked about what are the areas that in the live stream this weekend were the areas that we wanted to dive into. And the first one was soul guitar double stops. You know what I'm talking about. Let's see here. Those little embellishments that he would do over these, mostly the major pentatonic scale. Those style things. Now I don't own any rights to play any Jimi Hendrix music. I'm not playing any of his music. I'm not going to say any of his lyrics, any of those kind of things, but I'm going to have some inspired playing today. So soul guitar double stops. Let's start with the major pentatonic. That's where it really, to me, they shine. And usually if you've watched me at any time, we always start with pattern 1. So this is part of the 1-4, 1-3, 1-3, 1-3, 1-4, 1-4 box that almost all guitar players know. You learn this very early on. It's the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic, pattern 1, the way I call it. They both share the same pattern, so they both have the same name. They're just used different ways. Jimmy played in the Chitlin circuit for many years before he became the Jimi Hendrix. He backed up a lot of early rock and roll and R&B and soul artists and picked up in fact, a lot of his the stage stuff that he did, he got from them. So he would fill out a lot of the sound, especially live, because he was playing with a 3-piece. He would fill that out with embellishments in his playing. Because he was doing so much, because he was singing and he had lead and guitar, he had, no matter where his hand was, he had to have everything that he needed right there. So if you look at pattern 1, if you're in the key of E, which a lot of his songs, several of his songs were, if you look in the key of E, major pentatonic, which sits between the 9th and the 12th fret, it has a very geometric shape. The first finger could actually bar the entire 9th fret in that position. And if you take the 3 kind of in the middle, the D string, the G string, and the B string, you get at that fret, you get a B, an E, and a G sharp, which is an E major triad. Your chord is right there. And if you put your first finger, or your pinky, up at the 12th fret, you can put another E there. Or even put your third finger at the 11th fret on the A string. You have a full 6-string E major chord right there that shares the same area with your major pentatonic scale. So what a lot of people who do this style, Jimmy and a lot of other people do, is they use their first finger almost like a capo, like a bar chord. You've got your E major chord covered with one finger. That gives you 3 other fingers to hit some of the other notes of the major pentatonic scale, embellishing that chord. And a lot of these notes that he would play would be 2 notes together. Small little pieces of chords, not the whole big chord. You didn't really ever see him playing really heavy things. And a lot of that has to do with the tone he was using. We're going to get into that a little bit as well. Let's see here. He took advantage of the shapes. He added hammer-ons and pull-offs, mostly with the 3rd finger. And then releasing kind of back to the capoed first finger. It's a very, very soul music kind of thing. You've all heard this. That sounds in a lot of different songs. Even I even think of Paul McCartney songs that you have this kind of double stop that comes off of pattern 1 on the high E and B string, going up 2 frets and then back. Adding some interest, filling in time, where if you were playing this looking at a chord sheet, if you just had E for 4 bars, you wouldn't just play that there. You would want to add a little interest to them. And so he would use adding to going from one of the cool ones that I like. This shows up in a bunch of songs. And this is at the 9th fret if you bar the 9th fret on the A and the D string. And then let the 9th fret on the D string ring, but on the A string, hammer onto the 11th fret. It pulls you right into an E major chord. It starts with the tension and then resolves. Another part of the double stops that work there come more from the full major scale. If you go to your G and B string and bar at the 9th fret, add your 2nd finger and on the 10th fret of the B string, and then your 3rd finger on the 11th fret of the G string in front of that, and then let it go. You add a little bit of a passing chord sound, which you could then slide up 2 frets to get into another E major part of a chord, small chunk of a chord. You see what I'm doing there? I'm taking advantage of the shape of the major pentatonic scale with the first finger. Now, this is not the only pattern that you can use that on. We're going to go through some of that. We'll go through a good bit of the patterns. So this is pattern 1. Let's go back. Let's go to pattern 5. So on pattern 5, which lives in the key of E between the 6th fret and the 9th fret, there's a couple of places where that works really nicely, and it's on the low string. You have 2 notes on the E and the E and the A string that are right next to each other, so you can bar them. And if you play both of the ones at the 7th fret together, that's the root of E and the 5th. you can hammer on your third finger. You can do the exact same thing on the high E and B string. You just have to, you don't have the luxury of having your root note on those two. To resolve, you'd have to go to the 9th fret on the G string. So we've got pattern 1, pattern 5. Really nice stuff. So let's go to pattern 4 here. So you don't have the luxury like you do in pattern 1 of having your first finger all the way across for pattern 4, but a good bit of it is. I like the middle strings, the D string and the G string barred at the 4th fret and hammering on your third finger to the 6th fret and then resolving to your root note on the 7th fret of the A string. This is in the C. If you were doing cage, the C pattern. So we've got 1, we've got 5, 4, 3. Now, the pattern 3 in the pentatonic has those, if you do it the way you would see on paper, the 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. It has 3 notes on the low E, A, and D string, all in a row, which is perfect for this hammer-on pull-off barring. And you've got your root note at the 2nd fret of the D string. Okay, so I'm going back and forth between all those patterns. We did 1, 5, 4, 3. Let's go up to 2 here. So there's our pattern 2 in the major. The easy one is barring at the in the key of E, barring at the 12th fret on the high E and the B string, and hammering on with your third finger to the 14th fret on the B, and then letting go. Hammer on and pull off. So there's a lot of ways you can take advantage of this style of playing, Jimi Hendrix, the soul double stop style of playing, in every single pattern of the major pentatonic scale. Okay, so I'm gonna get back to the soul double stops and some of the songs he uses those in. Little Wing is a really, really neat song because of the relationship between the major and the relative minor, and he uses these in both places. So when he's playing over a minor chord, he will use the same idea, but over a minor sound. So say we were in the key of A, and there's an A minor playing. How could we use these soul double stops over a minor? Well, we just take the same idea. Where's pattern 1? Pattern 1 in A minor is at the 5th fret. And we've got our roots at the 5th fret on the E strings and the 7th fret on the D string. Same idea, just resolving to a different place in the scale, to where the A is this time. You hear this in a lot of blues too. They'll do double stops. So I'm plucking the high E string, and then picking different notes throughout the pentatonic scale. And you hear this style playing all through. So let's try this in a different key. Let's try this in E. Hammering on with the third finger and going back to the first finger where that's kind of barring across where that. So what if we were to go from the minor pentatonic to the major? Well, in the key of, if I'm playing an E major. Let's see. Oh, E major. Okay, let's do E major. The relative minor of E major is C sharp minor. I'm playing the same notes. I'm hammering on the same idea of using that first finger and hammering on the third finger and letting go. The only difference is I'm resolving to either 12 or 9. 12 being the E major, 9 being the C sharp minor. And they take on a different character depending on the sound, that's the chord that you're playing over at the time. So that was Little Wing. It uses both of those ideas. Like I said, I'm not going to play the song. When Cry Mary also uses that same idea with hammer-ons. And in that song, there's a chord sequence that slides up. And each time the chord slides up, the hammer-on up to the third. This sound that we talked about before, where we played that on the A and the D string, going from a barred 9th fret to adding the third finger on the A string on the 11th fret. And When Cries Mary, that slides up as the chords go up. And Crosstown Traffic also uses that. Also, Axe as Bold as Love also uses this idea as well. And so that's the idea. That hopefully that gets you kind of started with these kind of Hendrixy double stop soul music. They're really interesting if you've got a song that has a lot of different chords that last for a long time. These can be almost like a suspended. A lot of you guys have learned suspended chords from me and how they're great for filling time. Well, this is also a great idea as well. So if you've got an E chord for 4 bars, throw some of this in there, embellish a little bit, fill up some of the spaces. It would be, it's always fun to do. I try to do it in every song that it's appropriate for. Okay, so that's part 1 there. I'm going to check the chat. I haven't looked at the chat yet before we move on to part 2. Okay, so we've got Evan and Josh is here. Dino, hey Dino, how you doing? David's here as well. Hey, Chris is here. Good to see you, Chris. Great to see you. So we've got a few in the chat, and Evan says, at least trying to keep all us quarantine guitar players from getting bored and going crazy. This is good for me too, man. It's challenging. It's challenging. I was excited about this all day. I'm getting everything ready, making sure everything was working well, and getting, the intro, outro music and all of those things. And so if you're watching this is the long form. This will be on Mondays, but we'll have some other things that I'll talk about once I get through all these different stops. So, and Chris is here too. Let's see here. There's something I was wanting to do, Chris. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to head on back to back to number 2. And the second thing we talked about over the weekend in our live streams about Hendrix, the things that we'd like to go over today. I'm going to adjust something right here real quick. Turn my brightness down. Let's see here. Okay, got that adjusted. Okay, so the next thing that we talked about this weekend to really dive into Hendrix's chord playing is some advanced chord movement. The way that Jimmy moved chords around was really different. It was very, very jazzy. He would take chords and slide them in places that chords might never want to be. and he did it with such conviction and was so confident in his playing that they really sounded wonderful. Used a lot of chromatic movement in the way he took chords around, especially some chords that have some different types of sounds. Listen to When Cried Mary. Those are chords that have a lot of chromatic movement. Bop, bop, bop. Little Wing did that as well, walking up to the 5 chord in Little Wing before resolving it to the 1 chord. He would go 4, sharp 4, 5. Just took a whole voicing of a chord, bop, 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 like that. So a lot of the ways that he played chords and did songwriting was really, really, really ahead of his time for rock music. He was taking some of these ideas from other styles of music that he was listening to. Little Wing was one of those too. But one of the chords that I want to talk about is the sus2 chord. And the sus2 chord is, you think of it, you hear sometimes people say a sus9 chord or a sus2 chord. And the operative note in a sus2 or sus9 chord is the same. So we're going to talk about the sus2 chord in the key of A here. So if you take a bar chord, just a regular A bar chord at the 5th fret, and play it on the top 4 strings, voice it that way. To make this a add 9 chord, you would take your pinky and you would go from your first finger, which is the root of the chord, the A, and you would put your pinky 2 frets above that. If you remember from whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, the 2nd degree of the major scale is a whole step above the root. So we've got your first finger up 2 frets. We've got our 2nd, or a 9 chord. Now, generally, when you deal with extensions, as long as your chord has its functioning notes, those get reserved for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When you go into 9ths and 11ths and 13ths, those are notes that are more about color tones and not the functioning of the way the chord functions, but ways of decorating the chord more. So I just added the note that's the 9th. The 2nd and the 9th are the same thing. It's just the next octave up. So that's the sound right there. It's a really neat sound. But Hendrix didn't do this. He didn't use the note on the G string. He didn't use the 3rd of the chord. He removed that. And basically we just turned that note, which is the 3rd, and moved it back 2 to make it a 9th. So if we took that 3rd, move it back 2 in the key of A, we get a B note, which is the same as this B note up here. So what I'm going to do is put this B note on the E string high, keep my first finger on the B string on the 5th fret, which is the E, play the root of the chord A on the D string, and not play anything on the G string. This is called a sus2 chord. We've taken the we've taken the third and lowered it down to a 2. So this chord doesn't have a happy sound or a sad sound. It is just a sound. It's a chord that has kind of a strong fifth in it, like a power chord, and then a ninth on it, or a second on the top. So it's got a neat sound to it. And what Jimmy would do is he would move this chord around a lot. Try it in different places. He might go just up whole steps. And use it kind of like an embellished chord. An embellishment, when we do these other things, if you've got it, say you have an A, and it lasts for a long time, as an effect right there. Not figuring out what the chord actually was in all of these different areas, but that movement of fifths, it's kind of like sliding power chords almost, just a higher version of it. So tried it in different places, figured out how it would sound really nice, how it matched the chord structure that was going on there. There's a really good, I was looking up, wanted to see what other people thought about this, and I found a really good blog post from Scott Morano, and this was for Guitar World, where he talks about the sus2 chord, and I will put that in the show notes of the chord. And the last thing in our advanced chord movement section, the way he moved chords around, was his economy of movement. And what I'm talking about with economy of movement is going back to some of the things we talked about earlier about, is he's so busy with what he's singing and playing and lead guitar that he wasn't able a lot of times to play a nice big huge voicing, and he may not have wanted to because he used a lot of fuzz guitar. And if you've ever played with a fuzz pedal and tried to play just a regular bar major chord, it doesn't sound that great. There's some notes that are fighting each other when you have that much distortion. And so you would see, especially if you would see, I looked at a live video for Freedom, and I looked at Foxy Lady, and I went through a bunch of the different ones, and I started noticing something, Purple Haze, all of those things, that he would rarely strum a whole chord. He would hit the bass note and then hit the two highest strings. Something like that. He was rarely playing the whole chord at one time. And I think a lot of that had to do with it didn't sound good to his ear with all of the distortion that was there. So he was fragmenting chords a lot. And a lot of times, the chord that we're going to get into next, he would have to voice that in different places because of the runs that he was working on as well. So making chords work with fuzz, never playing the big all 6 strings voicings, and usually 2 or 3 notes at a time, or getting the bass note and then the rest of the chords separated so they're not fighting each other for that space when you have a really distorted sound, is a really, really, really big part of his sound. So really interesting stuff. Let's go on to, let's check the chat once more. We're about to move on to number 3 here. And I see Chris and Mike and Dino, and everybody's watching the live stream from home. Great to have you guys here. Great to have you guys here. I'm going to keep moving here with my third topic right here. And so with Jimmy's, his soul double stops and his chord movement, the next thing would be one of the chords that you would see in a lot of his very, very famous songs. and that is the 7 sharp 9 chord. I'll do it in here's a D 7 sharp 9. Okay. This is also called the Jimi Hendrix chord. He's one of those few performers who gets a chord named after him. So that's I'm sure he would love that. There's the James Brown chord and the Jimi Hendrix chord, which are really only there's one note, a half step difference in one of the notes between the two chords. So you get your James Brown and your Jimi Hendrix chord. So let's talk a little bit about this chord. I'm doing it in D. And what we have is basically a 7th chord, a dominant 7th chord. If you look at the first 3 notes here, we have on the A string at the 5th fret, we have our D, we have our root note. On the D string on the 4th fret, we have our F sharp. So that's the 3rd of D. So at this point, we're headed towards like a D major type sound. But then we get to our next note here, which is tucked underneath. It's at the 5th fret as well, but on the G string. That's the flat 7th. That gives you your dominant sound. That's like a funk type sound, a blues type sound, or in jazz, a 5-to-1 type sound. The dominant chords, they always feel like going somewhere. They have a little bit of tension to them, all on their own. But what Jimmy did was he added a note to this right here. I'm going to show you in the video. I'm going to put my pinky on the B string on the 6th fret. Take a listen to that. Is that a happy sound? Not especially. Is it a sad sound? Not especially. It's a tense sound. There's some notes that are kind of rubbing against each other. But it was the perfect sound for the style of music that he was wanting to play. So let's talk about this note I just added. This is in the key of D, I've added an F note. Now remember, before I added an F sharp. So if we play those 2 notes together, listen to that. Terrible, right? That's when 2 notes are together, it's like playing a white key and a black key that are right next to each other on the piano, right? So we have the familiar sound of the 7th chord with the tense sound of the note that's called the sharp 9. And where do we get that? Remember when we did the sus2, the add 9 from the last video? If you have your root, you go up a whole step. That's your 2nd note. Also the 9th. They both share the same. The note shares the same. 2 names for the same note. So if we were to raise that 1 more, give you a sharp 9. Okay, so this is not a functioning note. The functioning note of the chord is the major 3rd. Okay, that's how the chord works. The sharp 9 is adding this tension to the top of it. So I've used to play this a lot in jazz. We would add a sharp 9 to a flat 9 to a 1 chord. Okay? We're adding this line that resolves to the 5th note of a major. Flat 9, sharp 9, flat 9 to your 1 chord. So tense, even tenser, resolve, right? So basically what he did is, instead of using it as functioning as a chord that instead of functioning as a tension chord and a passing chord, something that's moving on to something else, he was focusing that sound, making that sound the song. You heard it in Purple Haze. You heard, I think Foxy Lady, I think, has it in it as well. And when most people think of the Jimi Hendrix voicing as this one that I'm playing right here on the center 4 strings, but a lot of times with what he was out singing and playing, he couldn't get to that in time to make it. He would have to start voicing that on the top 4 strings. In fact, the more I watched of his live playing, he rarely used this one right here. He would use a different voicing of it. Actually, same voicing, but it's voiced on the top 4 strings. So instead of having your pinky up ahead, when you voice this on the D, the G, the B, and the high E strings, you have, let's do this in E. It's easier to demonstrate. So we have the E at the 2nd fret of the D string, G sharp on the 1st fret of the G string, and then we have 2 3rd frets on the B and the high E string. And you'd see him not really even playing the whole chord a lot, playing those top 2 notes. Because the fuzz, if you try to even play like 3 or 4 notes at the same time, it would have a hard time getting through the fuzz there. So how about soloing over the 7 sharp 9? What's some ideas about that? Jimmy played the minor pentatonic mostly over that when he was soloing over in that section where that chord would be. And that works. It sounds wonderful on the tension, because the minor pentatonic has the minor 3rd already in it. And in blues, we have a lot of going from minor to major. We're used to hearing that sound of playing minor pentatonic over a chord with a major 3rd in it. It works really good. But there's other ideas. If you go into jazz, we're not going to delve into that too much. But the diminished that starts on a half step. See if I can get a loop here. Let's see. The half step, whole step, diminished scale is really a scale that outlines arpeggio notes. So if you have an E7 chord, we're going to add some half steps to each one of those. So we're going to have one in front of the root, but the rest of the notes are behind. So here's root, 3rd, 5th. Let's just do it in 1 octave. Root on the, let's say an E is at the 12th fret. And then we have 12th fret, 11th fret on the A string. That's our 3rd, our G sharp. And then we have our B note, which is at the 14th fret of the A string. And then our flat 7th, which is at the 12th fret of the D string. To get this half step, whole step sound, we're going to add a half step above the root, and all the other notes get a half step behind it. It's a really neat sound. A lot of people will play the diminished scale, and they'll automatically think, "Oh, this is strange," and I'm not really getting a whole lot out of it. And then what ends up happening is once they start seeing it and seeing where it lies over top of arpeggios, especially arpeggios for this song and for this chord, it works out perfectly. That it really makes a lot of sense. So that's a tip for getting some ideas for the diminished. And there's some other ones too. We're not going to go into the altered scale. People call it the Superlocrian or the diminished whole tone scale. Okay, so that is my diving into the chords, chord ideas, and some of the rhythm that Jimi Hendrix did so well. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of it. Just hold on for a second, and I'm going to head on over. We're just going to talk a little bit about this experiment that I'm doing. So let's see here. I'm going to go do the chat before we get into the last section. Evan says, I miss listening to the podcast on the way to work on Wednesdays. Yeah, it's it's different, but desperate times, right? Desperate times. And 7 sharp, talking about the 7 sharp 9 chord and talking about that diminished scale too. Okay, I'm gonna head back over and we'll finish this out. We're gonna talk a little bit about the experiment. Okay, so we're back. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. If you've made it this far into the podcast, that you deserve to know what's going on. I'm changing things up a little bit. We were talking about a lot of people listen to the podcast on the way to work, and that's not possible for a lot of folks right now. We're in a different situation than we were before. So I'm changing things up a little bit. I'm going to have it here for everyone on Mondays live, and you can come back and listen to it as a podcast or on YouTube. A lot of people are watching a lot more YouTube now because they're home. But that's not all I'm doing. Here's the idea. We're going to start on Fridays. Fridays is we do our hangout. So a lot of members of the community have been hanging out with me on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 4:00. Right now, the Fridays and the Sundays, we're dealing with a lot of the Guitar 30 challenge that's going on. And if you are interested in taking the challenge with us, you can just head on over to playguitaracademy.com, and right up at the top in green, right up at the very top there, you can see a link that will take you. You can get your planner and your calendar. Now, you can start your 30-day challenge now if you want to. Basically, it's a practice challenge to see if you can get half-hour a day for 30 days. You could really start this any time of the year that you wanted to. It's just more fun to kind of do it all together there. So Fridays, we're talking a little bit about the Guitar 30 challenge. Saturdays, we had Guitar Talk. This week, we talked about 80s guitar players and what we remembered about them and some of the different styles that they use, and everyone was sharing their ideas. We're going to pick another era to discuss this week. It might be, I can't decide whether we're going to go back or go forward. But that's coming soon. So that's Saturday. So we have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're also going to be going over during those live streams on YouTube the topic for the week, and which everyone who was in the chat helped me this week with this topic. This was not something I was going to do, and I'm glad that I did it. It was a lot of fun. I got to share a lot of my experience playing a lot of Hendrix for a long time. So by the end of that, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, hanging out, live streaming, we're going to be working on also the idea for the week. Monday, which is kind of like today, we are going to, I'm going to do the podcast from what we came up with live in 3 sections. You notice today we had, we did the soul guitar double stops. We also did advanced chord movement, and then we did use of the 7 sharp 9 chord. And I'm going tomorrow morning, the next morning, I'm going to split those into 3 different videos. So because some people don't, on YouTube, I've noticed, don't respond well to long form content, and some people do. And so you're going to have Mondays, your long form content, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, you'll have each one of these in a shorter form. So much easier to digest if you only have a few minutes to watch a few videos. You still get the content for the week. Then we just start all over again. Hang out on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that's the experiment. I'm hoping it goes well. It's a lot of fun so far. And we're diving into this, trying to change up with the new world that we're living in right now. You can go to youtube.com/Play Guitar Academy and subscribe right there, hit the bell so you know when we're going to, it will remind you when we're going to be doing all of this. Okay. So that's the show for today. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me, and I'm going to call it. And that's a wrap. Thanks to I'm live, right? Live, right? Okay. Let's do it again. Ready? That's a wrap. Thanks for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player or on YouTube. Also, I really appreciate it if you could leave a review for the show. If you're just starting or new to the guitar, head on over to Start Here Guitar. You can check out my premium 11-week beginner's course. It gives you the foundation that you need to move forward correctly on the guitar. Also, follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at playguitarpodcast.com. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye. Okay, that's the show for today. I'm going to head on over here just to check the chat out and see what's everybody's who's hung out with me. I appreciate you hanging out. I'm going to go back a little bit. Let's see here. Josh says it's been great. Dina says loved it. New ideas for practicing between major and minor chords. Evan says I've been making it a point to get up early and listen over my morning coffee, but it's just not the same. Yeah, it's not. Maybe this will be better. I hope. Not a bad idea. The coffee thing, I like to put a couple scoops of cocoa in mine. Yeah, very nice. Chris said good idea with the shorter form. And also great for a look back or a refresher. And Evan makes his coffee strong. And Chris, I think the experiment works well, and I hope it works better for you too. Yeah, this works. It's working great. It's Monday, and my content is finished, and I did it with you guys, so I know that it's something that people are going to like. So I don't have that. I wonder if this is going to work out well. And so now it's just editing for the next 3 days, and then we're back going live on Friday. So I'm very happy. Got all the lesson videos done last night. I was up till about, I don't know, I think they all got up by about 2 last night, and it was really fun. I like it, and it's going to leave a lot of time for me during the week to get the Academy rolling and knock some more videos out. So I'm pretty happy. Chris says, great job, Lee. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. It's so good seeing you here. That's awesome. Evan says, you make it look easy. Well, I don't, thanks. It's not. It doesn't feel easy. I'm sweating. I didn't mess up too bad, right? I think so. Dina says, well done. And Josh says, thanks, Lee. It's been great. Anything added to the 7th is awesome for me. Lots of new things and ideas here. And then Chris said, I just had a flashback to when we did a show twice. Yeah, that was terrible, man. That was no fun. I felt so bad keeping you for so long, because especially I remember that it got really late for you, so we did that. It did a whole show and didn't record. Oh man. So David's here. David says nice. Good to see you, David. And Evan says that he's laughing and says that's greatly. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream in a few minutes. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to be doing a bunch of editing and getting all of this together. And we'll see if the experiment continues. One thing I'm going to have to work on is this between 4 and 5. Notice how bright everything's getting. I have this window here. And it was just perfect at 4 o'clock. And now I guess the sun has gone down, and it's just, I'm alabaster white on this side and shadowy on this side. So I'm going to have to figure that out next time. But who cares, man, right? It's guitar. So thank you guys for hanging out with me. And let's see, we got a couple come in here. Josh says, I remember listening to a show that was talked about being done twice. Yeah, that was with Chris. It was with Chris. usually even if I'm doing this on my own without live streaming, it and I mess up really bad, I just keep going and edit it all out, you know. And but I thought doing this live, I would stumble on my words a little bit more and those kind of things, and I think it went okay. Not bad. I'll look back and see. But so I'm gonna head out. Chris is gonna see me on the dark side of the moon. Okay. Thanks guys for hanging out, and I'll put some stuff up by tomorrow. Get this podcast out, the audio podcast out normal time on Wednesday, and I will see you all on Friday. Have a great week. Okay. Stay inside. Stay safe, and wash your hands. Right. Don't put your guitar pick in your mouth either. That's pet peeve of mine. Okay. Thanks, Dino. Thanks, David. I'll see y'all on Friday. Bye-bye.